his mansion. It's going to be really, really a major shift. And unfortunately, until it starts, really affecting people that don't care, then we're going to see change. So when Joe Manchin's mansion floods, maybe he'll care.
Exactly. Make Joe Shack again. I want to see that hat. No, you're absolutely right. And what you're pointing out, the genocide and destruction of this habitat of not only the animals that live there, but the people that live there in Brazil and other parts of the Amazon. Like another form of that fight is taking place in other areas. Like how you can burn down the Amazon to put cows there, or you can destroy an environment to put a pipeline through it. I mean, in both cases, you're devastating these populations. Are we really that different?
I encourage all the viewers to really cut down, completely stop eating meat if you can, but at least cut down on your meat consumption, because that will make a huge impact. You would be surprised if everybody in the world stopped eating meat 1 day a week. It would decimate the industrialized agriculture industry, would completely disrupt it. And that's when we can start really seeing change. When we start with our dollar telling them no more, we will start seeing change.
Yes. Meanwhile, on the moon, it's apparently wobbling. Now you might think, first of all, how does that happen? And that's beyond the bounds of this show, but why does it matter? More importantly, if the moon were to wobble, why would we care about that? Well, apparently it could prove to be devastating for the Earth. Researchers have found that flooding in American coastal cities could be several multiples worse in the next decade, over the 2030s, when the next moon wobble is expected to begin. They expect the flooding to significantly damage infrastructure and displace communities. Now, this is something that's been going on for some time, but it's the interaction that we really need to get into. So the moon's orbit is responsible for periods of both higher and lower tides about every 18.6 years, and they aren't dangerous in their own right. There's nothing new or dangerous about the wobble inherently. It was first talked about and discovered back in 1728. What's new though is how the wobble could potentially interact with rising sea levels that have resulted as a result of climate change. So back in 2019, NOAA reported more than 600 coastal floods. Scientists expect 3 to 4 times that amount in the mid 2030s after sea level rise has another decade to progress. So the wobble does what it does when the oceans were where they would be absent climate change. Now you have already worsening storms without the wobble, but higher sea levels that will interact with the wobble to produce floods that could devastate coastal infrastructure, could lead to people having to move, could result in loss of life. And all of this due to the moon wobbling a little bit. It's like when the murder hornets came out a couple of years ago, Vivian. It's like, do we really need this on top of everything that we're dealing with, Moon?
Yeah, wobbly, wobbly, wobbly. Remember that song? I mean, let me go back to 1798. They knew this about the moon in 1798. It's amazing. There was so much incredible knowledge that was grown out of the early astronomers. And I cannot believe that we even knew that back then. It is something I never heard before. So this is incredible to find out now. And it's scary. We do know that the moon has so much to do with us here on Earth. And it even is argued that it's tied to women's menses. So I mean, we don't even know the consequences that this could have. So it's really fascinating. And this combined with the crisis of the climate, it sounds like a recipe for destruction, honestly.
It does, and it does. And if it occurs at such regular intervals, every 18.6 years, man, if the 2030s are gonna be rough, well, you don't wanna be around to the next one after that. But it could be really bad. Finally, let's talk a little bit about how this might work, what we might be looking at. The floods will exceed flooding thresholds around the country more often and could also occur in clusters lasting more than a month, depending on the positions of the moon, earth, and sun. During certain alignments, floods could happen as frequently as every day or every other day for a period of lasting longer than a month. And this is going to go on for years. Now, to some extent, I worry a little bit about even talking about this because I know some right wingers are gonna be like, well, look, now it's just the moon. There's nothing we can do about that. But no, but again, we need to do what we can, which is to limit how much climate change is happening, how much the seas are going to rise. So
no, they're going to call it the second coming, John. They're going to say this is biblical.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we got to do something while we can. And if the infrastructure bill is that, let's at least get something done because we're looking at a rough decade coming up. Anyway, unfortunately, that's all the time we have, Viviana. But thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, John. You guys are awesome. Thanks for the work you're doing. Thank you to all the viewers. I really appreciate you guys too.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too.
For those of you at home, thank you so much for watching. Now is your time to go and vote for the Community Garbage Person of the Week. You can go to the community tab on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. We've got some awesome examples of garbage for you to vote on. And Brett and I will be breaking that down tomorrow. This is it for the Damage Report, but I will be returning later on with Jordan Ewell on Deep Dive, so definitely look forward to that. And before that, we've got Indisputable coming up in just a few minutes, so don't go anywhere. Or if you do, go to youtube.com/indisputablety, and it'll be coming up very soon. But until next time, stay safe out there, stay sane out there, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, you know what it is. It is indisputable. I'm your host, Rashad Richey. We have a show for you today. In the bullpen, we got Officer Brandon Tatum. He was on the show before. Our debate went viral, and he's willing to come back for more. This is going to be quite interesting. You want to stick around for the bullpen. Breaking down news of the day with me, I got the big homie, Jordan Yule, in the building, the virtual building, by the way, not a real one. That hasn't happened yet. But he will break down news of the day with me, progressive activist and host of Deep Dive, a remarkable show. And my top story, 19-year-old college student was arrested for a hate crime. What was this hate crime? She's accused of defacing a pro-police back the blue sign. That's it, nothing more, nothing less. According to the report, she stumped on a sign that had back the blue on it. She crumpled it up and she threw it in the trash can, literally doing the opposite of littering, doing the opposite of a crime. Well, a police officer saw this conduct. This was because of a routine traffic stop. Yes, what she did may not have been the wisest thing to do in this small county in Utah, but it should be protected, should not be a crime or a hate crime, right? Let me give you the background. The sheriff's deputy was wrapping up a routine traffic stop at a Utah gas station last week when he saw a teen take a back the blue sign, which urged support for police officers, and stomp on it, and her friend, after her friend was pulled over. Okay, I'm still trying to find the crime here. The teen, identified in court documents as 19-year-old Lauren Gibson, then allegedly crumpled it up in a destructive manner. That's what they put in the police report, destructive manner, and threw it in a trash can. Garfield County Sheriff's Deputy Cree Carter wrote in an affidavit, the officer who accused Gibson of allegedly smirking at him in an intimidating manner arrested her. Do you hear a crime yet? It gets deeper. Garfield County Sheriff's Deputy Cree Carter said in a statement that when he was doing a routine traffic stop at a gas station, he saw the teen take a black and blue sign and stomp on it. Back the blue is a slogan that shows solidarity with law enforcement in the country, often used to counter Black Lives Matter protests as well. Okay, she gets arrested for throwing away garbage. Okay, she got arrested for that. She crumpled it up aggressively. It was just so offensive and intimidating. This police officer must have been terrified for his life because of this 19-year-old college student doing this thing in front of him. Then something else happens. Not only does she get arrested, the district attorney gets involved and decides to provide an enhancer to the initial arrest. In addition to disorderly conduct, Gibson has now been charged with criminal mischief with a hate crime enhancement. The latter crime, county prosecutors allege, was committed with, and I quote, the intent to intimidate or terrorize another person in violation of Utah's 2019 hate crime law. The hell? These folks are teaming up on this 19-year-old college student. Here's what the student had to say. If it was a dentist sign or something and I just crushed a dentist sign or something in front of them, like nothing would have happened, she told the Daily Beast. It's the same thing, it's just an occupation. And she's correct. If she would have defaced, let's say, a dentist sign, nothing would have happened. But let me go deeper than that. If it would have been a Black Lives Matter sign, nothing would have happened. Hell, she may have been giving money for lunch, okay? So you mean to tell me that there's a law passed specifically for intimidating police officers through that action? That's insane, that's ridiculous. That makes sense to absolutely no one. a complete miscarriage of justice. Now, this 19-year-old college student, and I know some people will argue what she did was unwise. Damn that argument. What she did was legal. What she did should have never led to a criminal prosecution. Where are the conservatives who say government intrudes too much? Where are you at? Where are the libertarians who say we don't need these laws that violate or regulate regular human behavior? Where are you at on this? You're silent. You're not saying a damn word because it's contrary to your narrative. Now, I could not find a picture of the deputy who actually did this, but I found a picture of his boss. Here's his boss. This is James D. Perkins Jr., the Garfield County Sheriff. He is an elected sheriff. I have provided for you his phone number as well as his email address. And yeah, this young lady's life has been turned upside down because of this overly sensitive cop and a ridiculous Utah law and an overzealous prosecutor who says that doing something to a sign that's not even connected really to the police, it's a regular sign, it's just a sign. Because of this, she has now been charged with a hate crime. Jordan, what are your thoughts about this?
Dr. Ritchie, first, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. There's a couple of things as you were explaining the story that really stood out. So first, I was curious earlier and looked up when the term "back the blue," which is what the sign said, really started to gain popularity. And it wasn't until 2015. So to act like, and just to show the speed in which they implemented this, to apply these same standards that are historically been used, to have historically been used to protect marginalized groups, how swiftly they move, because that term really only started to spike in popularity in 2015. And this was after Michael Brown, after Freddie Gray, when those two murders at the hands of the police galvanized the Black Lives Matter movement. So again, this is in direct response to that and to how swiftly they applied that should be noted by people. She threw this sign away and received a slew of charges, and it shows how systemic this type of corruption and influence the cops have, and how they work hand in hand with prosecutors to keep people at bay. And this is ultimately about exerting control over people who stand up to their power. Yeah. Had she littered, had she dumped a bag of trash out of her car window, she would have received a less harsh sentence. So it just shows what this is ultimately about. But another thing you pointed out that I just looked up, if this was a Black Lives Matter sign, they probably wouldn't have gotten into much trouble. So there is an instance of that, and it was the Proud Boys in DC in the wake of Trump's election and George Floyd. All of these things coalescing and all these movements in DC, these fascist movements, they did rip down a Black Lives Matter sign off a church. And the charges they received were misdemeanor destruction of property, no hate crime, despite this clearly being targeted toward a group of people. It's a slap on the wrist and they're free to go. So it really puts things into perspective. And this is, again, I can't stress enough, this is ultimately about a militarized, jackbooted force trying to exert control over people.
And what's interesting, brother, the fact that they could not prove ownership of this paper is the reason they could not charge anyone with destruction of property. You have to prove that someone owns the property or the property is connected to ownership, a business, individual, etc. But you're right also on the fact that you're looking at a perversion of a hate crimes law movement, which said when you have an immutable quality about you, something that you cannot change, such as your race, right? You can't change your sexual orientation, for example. These are things that are innate to you as a person, as a being, as an individual. Well, we don't want people to target you just because you exist. We don't want that. And so there was a movement to say, if you do aggressive, criminal, violent acts against these individuals because of one of these factors about who they are, then you can be charged with a hate crime. Makes perfect sense. That's rooting out bigotry. It is a great thing to do. And then all of a sudden, the pushback was, well, we need to have hate crime legislation for police. Well, you see, the blue comes off, this black does not. This is one of the tragedies of our political narrative. How do we allow them to get away with telling us that being a police officer as a profession should somehow create a level of protection that other professions do not have. There's no other profession that has this level of protection. But the truth is, brother, that we've allowed them to get away with it since the 1960s and beyond, with elements like qualified immunity and more.
Yeah, this is par for the course. It's not exactly surprising that a red state like Utah would react, and the state would act in such a manner. I can't stress enough how this is just a perfect example of how when people try to stand up to police authority, this is how they respond. We saw it in the wake of George Floyd. They'll respond violently. They will provoke you there's ample evidence of this throughout the country as people just peacefully demonstrated in opposition to someone being murdered. They will seek you out on the street. They will target you. They will shoot you with rubber bullets. They will spray you with tear gas. They will beat you when you're down. Stories we'll talk about later, the violence they inflict on people who simply get in their way or smirk in a menacing manner. The excuses they make just show how willing and easy it is for them to abuse their power, the power invested in them. It is a militarized jackboot force that has to be stopped.
Yeah, very well said, brother, very well said. Let me shift gears to a Baltimore cop. Once again, out of control. Baltimore cop accused of hiding his stepson's body in a wall has been charged with murder. Baltimore police officer Eric Banks Jr. has been charged with first-degree murder in the death of his 15-year-old stepson, Stepson Jones. Second-degree assault, reckless endangerment, disarming a law officer, resisting arrest, and failure to obey a lawful order. This was a cop. This was a police officer. And there was significant history that pointed to something more problematic. But he was protected by the blue. He was protected by his fellow colleagues in law enforcement. Banks has been in custody since July 6th when the police conducted a welfare check on the teen, only to discover Stepson's body in an attic crawl space. Banks allegedly reached for an officer's gun, saying the officer was gonna have to end this. Prosecutor said Banks made additional homicidal and suicidal comments after the arrest. He was a police officer. Here's his picture. That's him, Eric Banks Jr. Who is he charged with killing? This young soul, Stepson. Look at him. Now let me give you some more context to what happened. In the documents charging Eric Banks Jr., 34, police wrote that Stepson Jones's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation, with injuries also noted on his neck, face, and mouth. It was violent. They also said they found wet clothing that smelled of bleach and was stained with what police believed to be blood. Meanwhile, Banks' attorney, Warren Brown, said Banks had found Stepson dead in the bathtub and claimed the boy had committed suicide. A damn lie, okay? Banks' wife, Stepson's mother, had applied for 2 protective orders against Banks in recent weeks. She saw something coming, saying he was stalking her. The first was denied by a judge. The second was obtained only hours before Stepson was found dead. The judge didn't believe her, or at least did not believe it warranted an actual protective order. This is a woman saying, this person is stalking me. This person is violent. This individual is dangerous. I need an order of protection. No, the judge says. He's a police officer. You're gonna be just fine. She goes at it again. I need a protective order. Second time. They give it to her hours before the death of her son. Stepson's death and Banks' arrest came 2 months after 2 months of domestic violence complaints between Banks and his wife, Stepson's mother. She told police Banks was becoming increasingly erratic. Brown, Banks' attorney, said the officer tried to kill himself a day before Dasson's body was found. He was under suspension during the time of his arrest for murder. We don't know exactly why he was under suspension. One can assume that they figured it out, or they knew something was bad or something was wrong. But he had a history of bad behavior. The George Floyd Policing and Accountability Act, I gotta take you back to a policy. That act would have mandated, if it was passed into law, it would mandate a reporting mechanism for his background so that everyone could see it. But we don't have that act. We don't have that policy, and we do not have that transparency. Jordan, what are your thoughts about this case?
Well, I think the least surprising element of this is that it happened in Baltimore. Baltimore is one of historically the most corrupt police departments in the country. Whether it's Freddie Gray being brutally murdered by police, or the gun trace task force, and for people unfamiliar, that was a group within the Baltimore police, within the it was a unit that was designated with getting firearms off the streets. Well, this power vested in them they used to rob drug dealers, keep the cash, and then resell the drugs onto the street. And it was like by chance later on that they got caught and ultimately busted for it. But this is just, the Baltimore has a history of brazen corruption. So to see this guy come from Baltimore was probably the least surprising thing to come out of it. Oh, not even to mention, in 2016, the Department of Justice ruled that there was a series of civil rights violations by the Baltimore Police Department. Historically, terrible. But I think, yeah, you pointed out earlier that was really, really horrifying was that the judge blocked the wife's request for a protective order, and it shows the obstacle the legal system, judges, some prosecutors could stand in the way of police accountability. The legal system, in many cases, is a great asset to people, and it's you can find restorative justice that way. But in others, it's like this. It is an obstacle on the road to police accountability. So that was absolutely heartbreaking to read.
Yeah, producers, put Eric Banks' picture back on the screen for me, because you're looking at a man who is receiving a due process. He has been arrested. He's going to go to court. He will have his day in front of a jury of his peers. Due process is working for him. Now remember, he tried to take a gun from one of the responding officers during the welfare check. Did they kill him? No. Did they beat him senseless? No. He's alive. He's alive, and according to the reports, doing quite fine. And he will have due process. However, Dasson, let's put his picture up again. He won't. He won't. Now, I want to bring this point home. Where are the police unions right now? Have they released a statement? Have they told you that they are going to fight hard to make sure that police officers that have this kind of background are no longer part of the police force or police agencies throughout this country? Have they said that they are now going to start taking it seriously when police officers exhibit this kind of behavior because it can lead to tragedy like this? They're not saying a damn thing. Nothing. Nothing at all. Don't fall for the politics of these police unions as if they really care about protecting and serving. They care about protecting their agenda, and that is it. We got more on the other side. Stick and stay is indisputable.
I'm Nina Turner, and we are on the road to revolution, baby.
And I know sometimes people talk about the angry black woman, but I'm gonna tell you something. If you ain't mad as a mofo about what's going on here, something's wrong with you. When people ask me all the time, what are the lessons from 2020, is that progressives have to get more organized and we gotta come together. We have to be as agile as neoliberals.
The progressive movement has to understand that it's not just enough for us to have the right ideas. We are right on most of the ideas. We're not perfect, but we're 99% right because it is a humanitarian agenda, but we must get the power. We have to come together in a more unified way so that we utilize our power strategically to topple neoliberalism, and it's gonna happen.
Hi, I'm John, and I'm new to TikTok, but about 3 years ago, I started my daily political news show, The Damage Report, because I noticed this trend where every morning I was waking up to this tsunami of news that was just generally dreadful and horrifying and shocking, and I thought that if I could spend my time helping people to navigate this, serving as a bit of a life raft, pointing out which news is important and why, there are worse ways to spend your day. We're not an average news show, and we don't want our TikTok presence to be average either, so feel free to let us know what you'd like us to do on the platform, and maybe give us a follow at The Damage Report.
All right, Amazon Prime members, here's how you can subscribe for free on Twitch. Start by linking your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account, and then click that little subscribe or resubscribe button below the stream on Twitch. Scroll down and select the subscribe free with Prime button, and then you're finished. Close out immediately and share your little subscription alert with the chat. Send a cute message along with it, and bathe in the sweet, twitchy, Bezos-funded love. Hashtag Bezos Bucks.
Hey everyone, Matteo Scarapore here, author of Black Buck, which is Shop TYT's first fiction book ever. I'm honored. So, Black Buck is about a young man named Darren who's living in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. He lives with his mom, he has his girlfriend, he has his best friend, he has his neighborhood, and his neighborhood has him. Darren's also working at a Starbucks in Midtown Manhattan. And one day, this man, who's real suave and good looking, comes in and asks Darren to give him his regular. But for some reason, Darren says no. This man named Rhett Daniels, who's the CEO of a startup called Someone, located on the 36th floor of the same building, is impressed. And he invites Darren upstairs, and then he extends an offer to join his elite sales team. Darren reluctantly joins, and he soon realizes that he's not the only black salesperson there. He's the only black person in the entire company. So he goes through hell and back in order to make it to the top. And once there, he has status, money, power, but he says, you know what? I don't like being the token black guy. So he hatches a plan to help other people of color infiltrate America's tech startup sales teams, redefining what it means to be a minority in the workplace. This book definitely, if you couldn't tell, touches on many things that are relevant to this moment that we're all living in right now. But it's also connected to the many moments in history that have come before today. I hope that you read it. I hope that you enjoy it. And if you want to order a copy, go to shoptyt.com. Thank you, be well, and happy 2021.
Welcome back. We got a lot of comments. Let's go to these viewer comments. Make sure you are subscribing to the YouTube channel, Indisputable TYT, Indisputable TYT. We're at, 135,000, 136,000 subscribers. Thank you. That's because of you, all right? Also follow us on Twitter and Instagram, Indisputable TYT. Let's get to the comments. And before I go to the comments, I'm so happy we got our Twitch shows because they came from the community. They came from you. So make sure you check out the debut, Ray Actions with Ray Vanna today after Indisputable. That's at 4 p.m. And Galaxy Brain with Ben Carollo tomorrow after Indisputable, all right? And all you gotta do is, check out the Twitch to make that happen. TYT member, Mickey C, the Silver-Haired Dragon says, it's time to face that it's not just the training or department policies. Many people who are drawn to be cops are inherently sadist, have rage issues, and get an adrenaline rush from abusing and murdering. It's documented that 40% of cops have been charged with domestic abuse. Damn. I didn't know that. That's not including the families who were too afraid to report or the reports that were lost and never recorded. YouTube super chat, May Money in the Building says, Dr. Richey, I feel like I'm taking a free college class watching your show. I would take your class just for fun if I could. No degree necessary. Well, thank you for that. My college students would not take my class for the same reason. Believe that. Nicole Smith says cops get away with all kinds of crimes, battery, murder, sexual assault, domestic violence, domestic terrorism, hashtag police reform, hashtag abolish qualified immunity. Yeah. Black Picket says, love Dr. Richey, 100% TYT forever. 100, yes. Shamira Hill says, I love this show. Thank you, Dr. Richey. Love you back, both of you, thank you. Trayvon Gomes, or Gomez, one or the other, all right. Don't we have the right to protest? And one was being a cop of racial ethnicity. Of course, good point. Foreman Show on Twitch says, gangs get mad when you disrespect their gang signs. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I wish a Karen would.
You want to call the police on them for having a barbecue on a Sunday.
You're still free! Back off! I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
You know what we do? We highlight the Karens of the world because Karens are dangerous. Let me just say this for the record. If you lose your cell phone, the nearest black man did not do it. Let's start there, okay? There's a Walmart in California. A woman was there with her son. This woman falsely accuses a black man of stealing her son's phone at this Walmart. Here's the video.
For everybody watching, this lady on the phone, she accused me of stealing her son's phone. Followed me outside the store. First she was eyeing me in the store. As soon as her son happened to lose her phone, I guess I was around looking for blinds and she started looking at me. And I know I'm black with tattoos, so she automatically assumed I had it. His location says it's me. I have no her son's phone, but she's followed me outside of Walmart. I'm here in Moreno Valley. She came looking for a location, but it's right by my car. She runs up to me and says, excuse me, you have my son's phone? I pull my phone out and tell her I do not, as well as my money and my ID, and tell her who I am and I do not steal. And she continues, she's holding me. The only reason I'm not leaving is because I don't have a phone. You understand I'm waiting, right? Because you're wrong.
Then let's fix this. We'll wait until the police are here. You decide it yourself.
The phone should be following us, right? Right? Her son found the phone. Her son found it, though. It was in the car. Her son found it in the car. So now I'm going to press charges. Ma'am, may I have your name, please? May I have your name, please, ma'am?
No.
No? Okay, that's okay. I'll get your license plate.
What a horrible example she's setting for her son. She made a mistake. She racially profiled, obviously. According to the narrative, 9 other people were in that same vicinity. She did not blame them. She did, in fact, blame the one black guy with tattoos. Remember, these Karens are not afraid of black men. Never believe that. None of these Karens have shown any fear when there's a black man, unless they're playing like they are afraid for the sake of a 911 call. So let's dig a little deeper into what happened here. A video of a woman racially profiling a black man and accusing him of stealing her son's cell phone at Walmart, only to realize that her son had forgotten his phone in the car, is being widely circulated on social media. On Monday, Yashir Bryant posted the video on Facebook and YouTube saying he was shopping at a Moreno Valley Walmart when the woman started accusing him of stealing her son's phone. Now, Bryant explained some things, and I'm glad he did. So Bryant explains the woman and her son were in the same aisle as him when he overheard the woman questioning her son about the whereabouts of his phone. Bryant added that there were 9 other people around, but accused him of the theft because he was the only black man with tattoos. Okay, now who is this woman? Who is she? Well, according to the undefeated internet, her name is Liz. Liz, according to the internet, works at Kaiser. She was wearing a shirt that is typically worn by those who work at Kaiser. This was brought to the attention of the company, and here's what the company said via Twitter. Thank you for sharing this. This video has been brought to our attention, and we are actively investigating it. The conduct in this video does not in any way reflect the views or beliefs of Kaiser Permanente. The company said in a tweet posted as a reply to the video on Twitter. Sounds like an admission she works there to me. Jordan, what are your thoughts?
I couldn't help but notice just kind of how powerless he was in that moment. And as he went for help inside the Walmart, there was a woman working the door. He even tried to have her mediate and hear out his side of the story and help keep this woman at bay, maybe talk her down. And she immediately sympathized with the woman. She was telling him to calm down and to leave eventually. I would assume for censorship reasons, you didn't play the end of the clip where she turned around and said something to go F off. After she falsely accused him, refused to apologize, scolded her son as if it was his fault. She was just placing blame everywhere but herself. And while she seemed to be Latina, but she is very easily white passing. So she has an element of like kind of white womanhood in her. And like you just said, they're not really scared of black men, especially when they have the power of the state behind them. She's very quickly calling 911 on this false premise. I could have ended this guy's life had things gone awry. Thankfully, the kid found it. We could have had a much more tragic outcome, as we've seen so many times, and as you've talked about so many times on your show. These types of things can very quickly escalate because of how the police and society in general perceives, especially black men, as you said, with tattoos. So it's really, really troubling, and I can't help but sympathize with this guy. He acted calm, and even still, people were dismissive of his complaints.
Yeah, I mean, his composure was actually quite remarkable, given the fact that she started to literally follow him, and not from a distance. She was following him like they were a couple. I mean, she was just that close, as if they were walking together. He had the brilliance to know, I need to pull out my cell phone. I need to start recording. And let me tell you why people do this now, especially black men. Because we understand the power now of documentation like we never have before, okay? If something goes south, if somebody tries to arrest him, if somebody tries to detain him, if somebody tries to attack him because they think he's doing something adversarial to this particular woman, then he has some documentation that is not happening. We should not live in a society like that. That should not be the norm. That should be the anomaly. That should be every now and then that needs to happen. This has now become normative, especially for black and brown individuals when they are facing senseless and ridiculous and baseless allegations about their own behavior. It is quite insane. The other part is that when it got exposed, and this is why she made the show, okay? Because when I looked at the video, Jordan, I said, you know what, I'm not gonna put on the show if she apologizes for making a mistake. I won't put on the show. She would not be a Karen on my program. But she decided to not only double down, she started talking trash to her son about the guy standing next to her. And then she insults him as she's walking off, setting not only a horrible example, but showing that she is so dismissive of his very humanity and dignity that she's not willing to simply say to this young black male, I was wrong and I am sorry. Even if you gotta bite your tongue and swallow your pride, you do it for the sake of your child because you want your child to be a decent individual. What you just taught your child, you would never want your child to do to you. You would never want your child to make a mistake, to do something wrong, and to never own up to it. But that's what you're teaching your child in that very moment at that Walmart. That young man would never forget that his mother decided not to do the right thing in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, they're collective actions. Him misplacing the phone and her, false accusation Neither of them were held accountable for it. Neither of them apologized. They stormed off, told this guy to F off, and that's it. That's the lesson this kid's gonna take into life. It's like this guy's life ultimately, like again, he could have had a pretty tragic outcome had the police shown up. Had this gone awry, I mean, it's somehow his fault. So reducing this innocent man to a subhuman level was ultimately what she taught her son. And that's how hate perpetuates. That's how racism and bigotry perpetuates.
That's right. That's right. It's definitely chain behavior. It's connected somehow, somewhere. It is learned. You're not born with it, but this is how you learn it. That's what you saw in this exchange. You saw the teaching, the apprenticeship of bigotry, racism, and no accountability being taught in that moment. Okay, there's another officer. Listen, if it wasn't happening, I would have nothing to report on about cops. A former Houston officer charged for assaulting a handcuffed man. Former Houston police officer Lucas Vieira, 31 years of age, has been indicted on aggravated assault charges and faces a first-degree felony charge, which carries a possible term of 99 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. I know the fine seems low, the years are very high. The black man who was assaulted, Andre Howard, 34 years of age, filed a federal civil rights lawsuit alleging excessive force in April. The incident occurred when Vieira initiated a stop for a traffic violation on July 7th, 2019. Howard had been ordered out of his car and handcuffed by this officer. Howard had complied, did what the officer told him to do, had no weapons, but was still placed in the squad car before a second officer could perform what the suit described as a body cavity search. Howard fled, in fear of his safety. In a brief body cam video released by Howard's attorney, Vieira can be seen chasing Howard, shouting, "Shoot his ass." Remember, no weapons, no warrants, but the cop is saying shoot him as he's running away. To a second officer who is making gunshot sounds. The second officer detained Howard, and when Vieira finally caught up, he used another pair of handcuffs, like a pair of brass knuckles, to repeatedly beat the man. Let me show you a video.
Just shoot his ass! Shoot his ass! Bah! 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 All right, bro, you got it. You got it, bro. You got it. You got it, bro.
Okay, they handcuffed him. And then they took additional handcuffs, wrapped those handcuffs around a fist, and used them as brass knuckles to beat this man. Who did that? Who's been arrested for doing that? This guy. That's him. That's your perp. Okay. Looks like maybe tough guy, right? Can handle himself. He's a police officer. Who did he brutally beat in handcuffs? This young man. Him. Andre Howard. Look at him. He was afraid. He could have died that night. He received a severe beating. Let me tell you what else happened. According to the lawsuit, the young man you just saw, defecated on himself because he was so afraid, which led to further humiliation after he was brought to the back of the police car. You know what these officers did? They pulled down his pants to show publicly the defecation and his genitals to those who were passing by on the street. Are you hearing me? That is what they did allegedly to this young man after they beat him. They humiliated him, wanted to strip him of his dignity. You know, this story just has so much wrong with it. Jordan, what are your thoughts?
I mean, you aren't lying and you aren't exaggerating when you say he could have died that night. So they were hitting him in the back of the head, and that is something so dangerous. It's illegal in the UFC because the brainstem is accessible from the back of the head, and on top of you could cripple somebody permanently, and you can kill them with blunt force trauma to the back of the head. And what they did was, on top of hitting him, they added a makeshift brass knuckle with the handcuffs. That is horrifying. That is unbelievably reckless and dangerous, and you saw that in his behavior in the run-up to that, as he's sprinting forward, making gun noises with his mouth, and then go in and throws like haymakers with a makeshift brass knuckle. This isn't somebody who is invested in public safety, which is purportedly the role of the police in society. This is somebody who is a raving lunatic. He's out for blood, and he's out to cause and inflict harm. They humiliate this guy. They harm him. They brutally assault him, and maybe he'll be punished in the end. I mean, hopefully, but I don't hold my breath on these things anymore. We've seen time and time again the system work to protect these types of cops. So I'm not holding my breath. I would like to see some sort of justice for this guy, because look, if he runs away, okay, maybe you slap him on the wrist. You don't serve judgment right then and there. That's not how our system should work. Just as we've seen time and time again, you don't shoot people on the spot for disobeying. Like with Walter Scott just simply running away, he did not deserve to die. So these types of systems these types of incidents show how the police responds with violence first, questions later.
Think about the kind of depraved and reprobated mind it takes to beat a man, taking your handcuffs to beat a man in the back of the head. He's so afraid he defecates on himself, and you decide to take his pants down, exposing the defecation. I know it's graphic, we gotta deal with it. It is true. Taking the man's pants down and exposing his genitalia, exposing this embarrassment to make sure that people who are passing by could see him so that he could simply be humiliated. Think about what kind of mind you have to do something like that to another human being. And we're giving you a position of public trust. We're paying you from hard-earned taxpayer dollars to protect and serve. You took an oath to uphold not only the statutes and laws, but the Constitution, which is rooted in human dignity. That's who you are. This is who you are, and you don't exist by yourself because your partner didn't snitch on you. The folks that took the report did not snitch on you. Everybody knew what was happening here. The young man said it. He told everyone what went down. It took filing a federal lawsuit. Now the question is, what are they going to do to root out the rest of the corruption in that department? Because I promise you, the culture of corruption is present there, because nobody would think to act this way without feeling protected by the culture that they work in. We got more on the other side. It's indisputable. Stick and stay.
We are onto something that is going to be amazing, but what we need is your help.
The number one problem is there's too much power in too few hands.
Every single problem that we have can be traced back to dark money.
They take large donors, they serve large donors.
So these handful of gatekeepers try to dictate everything.
Like all of you already know, they don't work for you, they work for their donors. So fire them and hire people who will only work for you, that say no corporate back money.
We are going to change the way we elect candidates in this country.
Uncorrupted Democrats. We're gonna fight for the issues and win on policy.
This is incredibly personal. We need free healthcare for everyone.
We're fighting for $15 minimum wage
wage, single-payer health care, debt-free college, and we are gonna get money out of politics once and for all.
I've taken a public pledge not to accept any corporate money.
Because the last thing we're gonna do is go into another presidential election and run a corporatist against a populist candidate.
At some point, the buck needs to stop, and it's gonna stop with us. It's gonna stop with Justice Democrats.
So who are we?
People who do not take corporate PAC money.
We're relying on small donors.
99.9% of our contributions came from people.
You're a Justice Democrat, so you don't take any corporate PAC money.
I'm not influenced by money.
As a Justice Democrat, I made that pledge.
Not a penny. Absolutely no.
I will go to Congress unbossed and unbought.
We try to create a government which works for all of us.
That is what America's about, and that's what a representative democracy should be about.
We are just getting warmed up here.
Vote for uncorrupted Democrats. The fight starts now, it starts today, and it starts with you.
I've been honest with him. Like, yeah, I was upset with you and I shouldn't have done it. But instead I was like, I'm just trying to protect my engagement ring.
Did you know that more than 20% of the world's oxygen comes from the Amazon? Why? Because of trees. I know what you're thinking. Of course! So what do we want to do? We want to plant more trees so we can save the climate. It's quite literal. So that's what leads to our new partner, Plant Your Change. Love it. It's so easy. What they do is you take the credit or debit cards you already have and you plug it into the system. And if you so choose, you get to round up every purchase to the nearest dollar and they plant a tree for you, okay? Now you could also choose if you wanna do it on only certain kinds of purchases or only so often, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But literally every cent makes a difference here. It's Plant Your Change. And if you wanna know more information, just go to tyt.com/trees. Let's go save the planet together.
Now, top. No. No. No.
Today, a terrible day for the internet, a terrible day for America. The internet as we know it is not going to exist anymore.
A real dark day for information and yet another way that they're bleeding out the democracy.
We're now going to have these gatekeepers of information deciding what we can and can't see, and that's what scares me the most.
Whether you're conservative or progressive or anywhere in the middle, this is the one thing we should all agree to. Protect the internet, because the establishment is coming for it. Don't let them destroy the internet.
Unmute. That's okay. Wait, Mike, there you go, good.
Welcome back to Indisputable. Sorry about that. All right, we got a lot of viewer comments. Let's get to it. TYT member, Potion Seller says swatting, calling emergency services under false pretenses to harass another person is illegal. But Karening, calling the cops under false pretenses on a person of color, is totally okay. This kind of behavior should be treated just as seriously as it can lead to an innocent person getting shot. I hope he sues the hell out of her. Worst case scenario, Dragon says body cavity search, I consider that sexual assault. YouTube super chat, Nicolette says, wish Karen would, the new and improved TMZ. Okay, that's funny. Red light robot, no apology? Question mark. Nada. As a matter of fact, the opposite of an apology. Randy Vietti, ditto on taking a class from Dr. Richie, but probably through Zoom because I can't afford to move somewhere else. Cool. I respect that. Tempest Perham says, that's why people flee from the cops, especially when you hear that being yelled. You're right. Yeah. Snake Anthony 210, Twitch, shameful. What a horrible experience for that man and that child. Yeah. Depressive Progressive says she taught him to mistrust POC, people of color. Sharpie Diesel, I'm writing my senators. I know it's old fashioned, but we at least need to bring it to their attention before it escalates. This random execution of people of color needs to stop. Needs to stop now. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a POS alert. Piece of you know what. There's a Florida man, he had a plan. This Florida man planned to kill his ex-girlfriend and blame Black Lives Matter. I kid you not. This was his actual plot. As a matter of fact, he's not the only person to come up with a plot like this, by the way. 51-year-old Florida man planned to have his 22-year-old ex-girlfriend, her sister, and her brother-in-law killed, and then pin the murders on Black Lives Matter protesters. That's what he planned to do. His name is Daniel Slater. Let's get a picture up of Daniel. That's him. Daniel Slater hired a hitman to carry out the crimes, but it was stopped when the individual turned out to be an undercover FBI agent, thank God. The plot conspired between May and June of 2020 in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and while protests following the Minneapolis murder of George Floyd were taking place across the country. Slater pleaded guilty of murder for hire in a deal. He is expected to be sentenced to the maximum penalty for his crimes, 10 years in prison. I know this seems extreme, right? And it is. But remember, he's not the only one who has come up with a plan to kill family members and then blame it on Black Lives Matter protesters. Now, BLM, they're blamed for a lot of things. They're blamed for a lot of things and they don't fit. The blame does not fit. And so he figured, let's just blame them for murder as well. Murdering his people, murdering people that he knows. It was another woman's death that started an investigation into Slater. A 26-year-old woman who was acquainted with the man was found dead in Miami's Everglades National Park, February 2020. Court documents revealed that Slater wanted Breonna Slauba to kidnap and kill his girlfriend, Breonna Kane, but Slauba died from an accidental drug overdose before completing the murders. The investigation into her death led them to another person who knew of Slater's plot and cooperated with the FBI. So this all happened because somebody else died under suspicious circumstances. Good gracious. Jordan, this is deep, man.
Yeah, this is bizarre. Reading this story was really unnerving. And I think one thing that kind of stood out was how this guy thought it would be believable. Not that he's a rational actor, but he thought it would be believable if he pinned this on Black Lives Matter. Now, why is that? I think you could argue there is a strong, overwhelming force on the right to demonize Black Lives Matter and other activist groups, and they turn them into this omnipotent, omnipresent boogeyman. That's the perfect villain for everything. We see this also with anti-fascist protests, and they say Antifa's behind all this kind of stuff. And in a military context, people will say ISIS is everywhere. You saw huge investments in local police because they were afraid, and the transfer of military surplus gear to police departments because of the looming threat of ISIS everywhere. And when you have these types of existential threats, it's so easy to get people, especially white people in America, horrified. And they're easily manipulatable then. So this guy thought, hey, I'll kill my family, or I'll have someone kill my family, and I'll just blame Black Lives Matter. And it shows this kind of this brainwashing that the right has been so effective at in convincing people that Black Lives Matter is this ever-present looming threat right around the corner. You never know. You saw it play out in St. Louis when the McCluskeys went outside with guns because Black Lives Matter was just marching down the street. That was a threat to them. That presence was a violent threat to them, and that's how they wanted to respond. And my thought after that was, imagine the hysteria on the right and in right-wing media circles had he been successful. How quickly they would have ran with this narrative and demonized Black Lives Matter. It's horrifying, but this is the pipeline that they've created, and this is the narrative they enrich.
And it also shows his knowledge, his awareness of the narrative connected to Black Lives Matter, and how he believed that because of that narrative, he would be able to get away with murder and simply pointing the finger at individuals who are connected to Black Lives Matter, because he understands how they are being demonized, not only in the media, but by members of law enforcement. And he made an assumption that if he could figure out how to do this murder and pin it on a person connected to BLM, that person would be severely prosecuted regardless of the actual evidence. And here's the most ironic thing, brother. He may have been right. He may have been correct. If it had not been for this FBI undercover agent being involved in the middle of this from the beginning. All right. White man in Georgia arrested for allegedly beating a black teen. This story is whoa. So a Georgia man has been arrested and charged with assault, battery, cruelty to children, and disorderly conduct after he allegedly beat a teen with a belt because he didn't like the teen's use of profanity. Yeah. That's why he did it, according to the report. The neighbor was later identified as Matt Martell, a 29-year-old white male. The incident was caught on a home security camera. It showed a 15-year-old Malik Sim playing basketball with his cousins before a neighbor came outside. In the video, Martell appears to grab the teenager and shove him towards the garage of the home, which was out of view of the camera. Malik said, a direct quote from the victim, "He grabbed me with his hands around my neck. He threw me up against the garage and I hit my head," said Malik. Malik said he was in shock, but knew he didn't want to get in trouble for fighting back. There's more. "My son has played football. He has played every sport. He is fully capable of defending himself, but he knew he could not defend himself, so he walked away. He walked away, and still this man is chasing him with a belt. So now I am in full panic because my kids are unprotected," said Latika Sim, the mother of this young man. Latika Sim ran out during the altercation. She's the one who actually called the police when this happened. So literally you have teenagers doing what teenagers do. They talk trash while playing competitive sports. You have a white male that says it is his obligation not only to stop this young teen, but to physically assault, to brutalize, to fight this teenager. What grown man thinks it's okay to put his hands on any teenager? You're an adult. These are children. But it shows you how out of control this person's privilege actually is. Thankfully, he has been charged with multiple crimes, including cruelty to children. We will see exactly how this works out in the criminal justice process. Mama had to run to the rescue because her baby is being assaulted by a neighbor who came out acting like he's somebody's daddy with a belt. Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, the white supremacist mindset is on full display here. He runs onto someone else's property, assaults a kid, grabs him by the neck, throws him up against the garage. The kid hits his head on the garage because he was swearing while playing with his brother or cousin. I can't fully comprehend what would possess someone to do that. Like, sure, if you have an annoying neighbor, that's one thing, but like to charge onto their property and just beat the crap out of them because of his language. There's, it obviously reflects this pervasive warped mindset that this guy has, and he's just like looks like a total loser. I feel bad for the family. I feel really, really bad that the mom had to think about these things, like in that moment, what's gonna happen to my child. And they both, they acknowledge that it's like it wasn't even appropriate for him to fight back, because how police respond to these types of situations. If they saw that, they would probably apply some much different standard to this kid. They would probably see him as a lot older than he was or more violent than he is, and certainly not give him the deference and benefit of the doubt that he was simply acting in self-defense. So that he has to sit there and run away or take it or whatever just is another depressing reminder of how white supremacy in this society impacts these types of situations. My heart goes out to that family because he's just a kid being a kid. Who cares? Leave him alone.
Yeah, and social studies have proven time and time again that black teenagers, especially black male teenagers, they are seen as adults by a lot of these white male bigots who decide to act in such a criminal manner. And so literally you have individuals who are hyper aggressive racist or even implicit biased racist. They look at a black male teenager as a fully formed, functioning adult. And they decide to approach these individuals as if they are fully formed, functional adults. And they are not, they are children. I am glad to see the charge of cruelty to children added to everything else that he has been charged with. It is past time for us to bring awareness not only to the privilege that exists by these individuals, but also to the reality that these are babies, these are children who are being assaulted. And it should shock the conscience of everybody that this man did this. Now, if it didn't shock you, here's what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine a teenage white girl cursing outside of her home and a grown ass black man coming out with a belt and choking her and putting her on the side of her garage. Imagine that. Okay, now, if that shocks you, so should this. That's how that works, all right? My dear brother, thank you for breaking down news of the day with me, man. How can people check out your amazing show and follow you on social?
Dr. Richie, thank you again for having me. Yes, I host Deep Dive here on TYT on Twitch. We're on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern and Thursdays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Tonight we will have John Idarola on the show, so don't miss that. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jordan Newell.
Good stuff, man. Always a pleasure, brother. Thank you for being on Indisputable.
Thank you.
All right, we got more on the other side. The bullpen next. Stick and stay.
You're about to watch some behind the scenes footage of the Young Turks. Ooh. Now these are partial videos. If you want to get all of them, you become a member, go to tyt.com/join, and you'll get all the behind the scenes of me, Anna, John, JR, a little bit reality show like. tyt.com/join and enjoy this.
You know what you're seeing behind me? Jersey, hold. Watch me flip this camera. However I flip it. Do I flip it like this? No, I just took a picture. I'm bitzing right now.
What?
Behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. For members? I don't have my face on.
She doesn't have her face on, folks. Oh, that's JR's ass right there.
You can't take 5 minutes off, can you?
No, I can't, Johnny. Bye. I said it was live stream,
but I was lying. It's not a live stream. It's just for members.
Bitsy, this is my cat. You know what his name is? Kiki Cat.
Animals are innocent.
Control room and the insanity is obviously there.
Right now, as you can see, I'm directing or tech directing.
I'm so happy to be here.
This is what like a Labor Day beard looks like for Cenk. Man, you're a Young Turks viewer if you recognize me like this.
Such a big fan. Oh, thank you. You are the one person in my life I would love to meet.
What's going on, guys? This is a Bitsy or a BTS or behind the scenes with Hassan Piker, AKA Woke Bay.
Oh, hi, I didn't see you there.
I have finished my show, The Damage Report, and now I get into a really awkward time of the day.
When I'm sitting, the control room is right there. So I can see Bart.
And this is the Pittsburgh office, by the way. I'll refer to often as the boiler room.
You see how it's ripped? Is it super unprofessional to wear that at a business meeting? Or am I like cool, rebel?
I just finished doing the power panel and I'm fired up.
What do you do for TYT?
Not a whole lot.
If you're frantically tweeting at us that something's broken, thank you, because I'm fixing it.
And thank you for being a TYT member.
Super last thing, because there's always got to be a super last thing. Oh, that was disastrous. This has been behind the scenes, behind the scenes.
All right, welcome to Dr. Rashad Richard Indisputable. This is going to be quite interesting. I don't know if you can handle this much truth on any day of the week. The unrest inside of the black community and communities that support them. It's because these cops are not held accountable. You have a family calling 911, and that family is expecting help, not expecting their loved one to be killed by the very people they pay to protect and serve them. Did you ever notice a cop that you worked with call any black person the N-word or target people because they were black? Nope. But we disagree that somehow police officers are not also subject to the same systemic biases and racism as any other level of law enforcement.
It sounds like for everybody's need who wants to crucify the cops without looking at it.
No, crucify bad cops, brother.
Bad
cops.
We don't need the government to step into our lives mandating that we should be wearing a mask.
You think you putting on a mask, Trey, is government intrusion, but you don't think the government telling a woman what she can or cannot do with her body it isn't government intrusion.
Where does life begin?
You want to go there? I can read it to you, brother.
You seem very well prepared. Certainly more.
Of course, why would I not be well prepared? They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reform throughout this country, so I won't stop, and you won't stop either.
Climate is changing fundamentally, extremely, and non-linearly. It's becoming worse now. It's not when the levees burst that is the problem. It's in the anticipation of that.
So I hope every human being is safe. And by human beings, I do not include multinational corporations, especially the ones that started climate change in the first place.
What we're currently doing right now in cutting emissions is clearly not enough. There will be ramifications to what Trump is doing. I don't want people to suffer, but I feel like there's gonna be a lot of suffering because we have an imbecile as our leader.
Welcome back to Indisputable. Let me read some of these comments. Also, don't forget, reactions with Rayvana right after Indisputable today. So make sure you stick and stay for that Twitch program. If you're not on Twitch, make sure you hop on Twitch right after this show to check out that amazing new show on TYT. TYT member Cajun Dragon says, some real heartbreaking stories on the show today, but we need to hear them. You can't get better if you don't learn from all the mistakes currently being made in the USA. Thanks for helping us get better, Dr. Richie. It's a team effort, all right? YouTube Super Chat, thank you so much. Carrie Venus says, you're amazing. You're amazing too, and thank you for that kind gesture. Captain Pollywog Vanderbeef, it's a damn good name, sir. Thank you. Pumpkin Spice Dragon, I can't even vacation in Florida anymore. Not after Trey Martin's, Martin's murder, you're right. Trayvon Martin's murder, you're correct. Khalil Day, so the victim was scared to protect himself for fear he might get in trouble. This is America. He was afraid. He was afraid that if he fought back, he would actually get in some kind of trouble. Straight X says, WTF? Why would you think at any point it is okay to beat someone else's children? That's a new level of scumbagness, and it is. Sean Tucker says, fortunately, we don't need to pay for any classes. Dr. Richie takes us to school every day. Thank you, Sean. Rudy Giuliani freestyle video says, best program on YouTube, just saying. Thank you for that. We got a lot more. I can't get to all of them. Wish I could. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the bullpen. He's back again. Former police officer, known affectionately as Officer Tatum. We have Brandon Tatum back on the program. Brandon, good day, man. Welcome to Indisputable.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
All right, man, let's see if we can find a little more synergy this time, okay? policing in the United States of America. Obviously, there are some problems. Obviously, the vast majority of Americans believe police reform needs to take place. But I want to specifically start with a policy discussion about police reform. One of the largest bills is the George Floyd Policing and Accountability Act. Passed the House, stalemate in the Senate, likely not to get passed because of the political tribalism that exists currently in DC. But it has some good stuff in it. And I want to see, do we actually agree on the policy or do we disagree on the policy? So do you support any of the policy mandates of the George Floyd Policing and Accountability Act?
Well, I haven't read through the entire policing and George Floyd Act. So I haven't read through it. So I can't really give a comment necessarily on that particular bill.
Okay, let me read you some elements then, okay? And see if you agree or disagree with them on face value. The bill would lower the criminal intent standard from willful to knowing or reckless conduct in order to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct in a federal prosecution. So basically, it would make the intent standard the same as anybody else in the world, okay? The intent would not have to be willful. It would also apply if it was knowing or if it was in fact reckless behavior that led to the deprivation of the rights of somebody else.
Well, I really, in my opinion, based on being a police officer and being exposed to the things that police officers have to do on a day-to-day basis, I really think it's a dangerous path to go down when you have responsibilities that's not, available to the public. You have things that police officers are supposed to do, sworn to do, that are not the same responsibilities as members in the public, but yet you want to hold them equally accountable. I really don't think that that's a good path to go down. Policing is a very nuanced thing. Police officers show up to a scene, things happen in split seconds. They're not God. So there's things that can go wrong, although a police officer may not have the intent for it to go wrong or may not be malicious. And so I think that the standard should be some level of protection for police officers when they're doing their job on duty. That does not protect police officers who are nuts, who are going out and shooting the wrong people and abusing people. That's not, I don't even think that would somehow protect them. I mean, if you're clearly brutalizing a person that's not within the policies of the police department, that's against the law, none of those, change ups in statute will help you. You should go to jail.
But there's significant ambiguity in the interpretation of your intent, and that actually lies the problem, because a police officer can have what's called an objective standard to why he or she acted a particular way. They can have a subjective standard rather than an objective standard. So for example, if you say, I was in fear for my life, and so I decided to kill this person. Well, that's a very subjective standard, because your standard of fear may not be my standard of fear, right? So we can all agree that is already a subjective standard. And it is not the reasonable person standard where the court would judge the activity of the police officer based on what a reasonable person would do in that same situation. It's literally based on the subjectiveness of the individual police officer, which has gotten us into a lot of trouble as far as criminal justice in the United States of America. And let me ask you this question, because I do hear your point of view about policing is very dangerous. Well, number one, it's not the most dangerous profession in America by standards of injury and death. Cutting trees is the most dangerous profession in America by way of actual injury and death. And you do not have special immunity for individuals who cut trees. Also, driving a taxi and working as a clerk in a convenience store is more dangerous per capita based on injury and death than being a police officer in the United States of America. But you do not see legislation being passed in order to grant them special protections either. But the special protections apply to policing, and the defense you guys give is that it is the most dangerous profession in America when that is factually untrue.
Well, I mean, you can't make those comparisons. Cutting trees and going to the domestic violence call is two different things. Driving a taxi cab versus driving at 90 miles per hour in a high-speed chase or coming to save somebody's life. Those are two different things. You say special immunity. A police officer is not somehow judged on this subjective idea of them having a fear of life and death. That's not even in the statute. That's not even on the police protocol. Police protocol says that a reasonable person, that is reasonable that you fear for your life. You can't just walk out somewhere, see a black man walking down the street, and because he's black, you just shoot him in the back of the head, and you say, well, I was afraid because I was in the hood. That's not the way it works. You have to pass the test of saying, would a reasonable person be in fear of serious bodily injury and or death? And if that is the case, and the police officer is judged before a jury, then that person is convicted or not convicted. And maybe the prosecution, the state won't even take the charges up if they don't feel like it's enough meat there. But I mean, you would have to name me a situation where a police officer somehow killed a person and used the defense that they was in fear for life and death, and there is absolutely no way that was true. I haven't seen one of those cases presented.
So let me go ahead and correct you on the record. Number one, you're incorrect as far as the statutory language. The reasonableness is connected to case law. It's the interpretation of the officer's ability to kill someone based on them saying that they had a fear for their life. And also the second part about the reasonable standard. The standard that's utilized is not the reasonable standard of a civilian, of a regular person. Is the standard of others in law enforcement. And that has been the professional standard connected to the activity. That is problematic, and that's why the George Floyd Policing and Accountability Act says, let's take this standard and be reasonable about the standard. So let's include knowing, or let's also include negligence in the standard, because that is the standard that applies to every other person in the United States of America. I think that is fair. I don't think that should be considered a radical idea. That's a fair idea. Tell me the issue with having fairness. If you're going to be the chief accountability executive, right? You're the guy in charge. You are the chieftain of enforcing laws, and you yourself do not want the laws enforced upon you. Come on, brother.
Well, Dr. Ritchie, with all due respect, I disagree with you, and I think that you are not accurate about the burden of proof for a police officer having to explain whether they were in a life and death situation or whether or not they fear for their lives. Now, let's talk about this in very layman's terms. If your neighbor, just say he's a male and he has his girlfriend over and he's beating her up, you don't have any obligation at all to show up, to assist her, to help her, to get involved at any measure. A police officer is in a very different situation where if a man is beating up a woman, he has to respond and have to respond adequately, and has a lot of responsibility when it comes to de-escalation, have a responsibility when it comes to use of force. You can't just go out and just beat people up. You can't do that as a regular citizen.
Come on, brother.
As a police officer, you have a duty to apprehend people who are suspects with using a reasonable amount of force necessary to execute an arrest. So you are living in a different environment and have different responsibilities as a police officer versus a citizen. That's why there's level of protection for police officers that are not available to citizens, because the duties are very different.
Yeah, in the circumstance though, brother, if they're acting in a way that is reasonable based on the professional standard, if they're acting in a way that's reasonable, then they're already protected. Remember, the protection is built in based on all reasonable behavior given the circumstance. It's not just reasonable behavior, it's reasonable behavior given the facts available at the time. That's the judgment, right? So they're already protected. The statute would not change that. The George Floyd Policing and Accountability Act would not change that. It will make it easier for federal prosecutors to prosecute willful negligence or a knowing of criminal activity against an individual if you happen to be a police officer. That to me is a good thing. I know we're gonna continue to disagree on that point, but I do think it's a good thing for the profession. All right, let me take you to a story that recently happened in Utah. You are familiar with various forms of hate crime legislation being passed that says if you are violent against a police officer, you can be charged with an aggravator or an enhancer known as a hate crime, right? This is born, the whole hate crimes movement was born out of protecting individuals who are targeted because of things they cannot change about themselves, like being black, okay? You can change being a police officer if you choose. But once again, the law picks one profession and says this profession should have a hate crimes statute connected to the very profession. Let me take you to Utah. Let me show you how out of control it is. A 19-year-old college student took a Black Lives Matter paper sign and she crumpled it up after a traffic stop, crumpled it up, threw it in the trash can. The sheriff, I think his name is Cree, this sheriff decided to arrest her. They put her in jail. Then the prosecutor enhanced the charge to include a hate crime because she intimidated the officer. Now, literally, this woman didn't even litter. She put it in a trash can in front of a police officer. They have now charged this 19-year-old college student with a hate crime. And the sheriff's office, as well as the prosecutor, they are working hand in glove to prosecute this 19-year-old child because she intimidated, according to the report, a police officer. What are your thoughts about things like that?
Well, I would have to do my research on that particular case because that sounds extremely bizarre, and I have never heard of that a day in my life. There's no reason in the world that somebody would be charged with a hate crime or should be charged with a hate crime for, I guess, intimidating. And a police officer is protected and should be protected from people assaulting them because they have a unique duty. So if you assault a police officer, it should be an aggravated charge. It's in where I police that in the state of Arizona, it's not associated with a hate crime. A hate crime is when you are prejudiced towards somebody, you commit a crime towards somebody because of a prejudice that you have, whether it be sexuality or whatever the case may be. Police officers are very impartial, or they're impartial actors. They're acting on behalf of the state. It's not personal. So if you say something to a police officer or you disrespect the police officer verbally, it's not personal. They're acting on behalf of the state. Now, if you assault that person, it becomes aggravated. So I think that the aggravated charge is legitimate, but to say that somebody offended or was aggressive towards a police officer and that person should be charged with a hate crime is absolutely ridiculous. I would love to see this case because I think that there may be some things missing or left out because that just sounds out of control.
No, sir. Not a damn thing is left out. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure one of my producers, they send you the entire story, okay? What I just explained to you is the gist of the story. And they admit it.
It's wrong. If that happened, that's wrong.
Be careful here, brother. You may lose some of your street credibility with your Republican friends.
That's wrong. It's wrong for them to charge her.
You are in agreement, and I'm thankful that you said that. I'm thankful that you said that because let me tell you where it's coming from, and this is where I think we can reason together. The reason why the law was passed in the first place is because we have allowed other laws to be passed that grants law enforcement a protection that no other profession will have. Do you not agree that it is dangerous to be an emergency responder, period?
Well, it's different nuances. Somebody driving an ambulance is very different than a police officer. A firefighter is
they have to respond to gunshot calls. They have to respond to domestic violence.
They don't go to the scene. They
do go to the scene.
But no, let me explain this because I did this for a living. So ambulance, people in the EMS, and firefighters do not have a duty to respond to the scene unless it's rendered safe by police officers. So if you had a shooting that occurred anywhere in the country, a police officer have to be there to secure the scene before EMS can even respond. So if you get shot, not you, but just say hypothetically a person gets shot and that person is bleeding out and police officers don't have the duty or don't have the ability to render aid, that person is gonna bleed to death unless the police officers can secure the scene and make sure it's safe for the firefighters and EMS to come in because they're not armed, they don't have vests, they don't have the training. So,
all right, brother, I don't have unlimited time. You're not correct on that, and let me show you where you're not correct on that. Routinely, the ambulance, they do have to respond to emergency medical situations where somebody has been shot or assaulted, and if they get there before the police, they will routinely, sir, I can provide to you the EMT breakdown of how many times they respond without a police present because they have to save the life of someone, or they have to put someone in an ambulance, or they have to put someone.
Not in a violent crime situation, a shooting. They're not gonna. They have to wait for police to render the scene safe.
So maybe you're talking about some policy that's germane to where you're at. So I give you that. But I guarantee you, there are EMT workers, and I know some personally, they have routinely responded to gunshot victims, and they have started CPR without a police present. And they've done that because they wanted to save the life of somebody. So we definitely understand why. And if they broke protocol for that city policy, nobody called them out on it. Let me ask you another question about the Policing Act, the George Floyd Policing and Accountability Act, because I think we actually have more in common than apart if you get the politics out of it. Are you in agreement with a national registry that would highlight the names of police officers who are known bad actors in the police profession?
I don't know. I think that the registry is going to be handled by the federal government, which is kind of interesting because policing is not federalized. So I don't understand that a federal government will be maintaining a database. I'm assuming that police departments locally can tap into and make judgment on. I mean, I don't really know if that's the right way to go. I think there's a better way to do this. And you have a sheet, you have a record when you're a cop, and that record goes with you everywhere you go.
Yeah,
and
just
like people can look at my record.
Right, brother. Everybody's record goes with them everywhere they go. What are you talking about?
I'm saying, as a police officer, you have a file. You have a file for everything you've ever done as a police officer. Your record goes with you wherever you go. So if I left the police department and apply for another police department, they can pull my file from that agency. Have it on a federal level being managed by the federal government, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that helps.
Two places where you're incorrect. Number one, the registry itself is not actually done by the federal government. The federal government, what they do is maintain the registry for local jurisdictions to report. So the law itself would require a reporting mandate, but the local jurisdiction will still be in charge of the reporting. So that's number one.
Well, Dr. Ritchie, that's the problem. That's the problem, because if the police departments are not handling business on a local level, what was reporting to the federal agency going to do for them?
Let me tell you,
if police officers are not being held accountable and police officers are not being arrested or being charged or fired when they should, reporting to the federal bureau is doing nothing but virtue signaling.
Let me tell you what it does.
It's not going to stop a bad actor from working on police departments.
Well, brother, if you say it does nothing, then you don't care that it's done. If you say it just does nothing, you don't care that the registry exists or does not exist. But I do disagree with you. It does do something. Let me tell you what it does. Number one, you're also incorrect on your assumption that these particular police officers have a reporting mandate when they go to another department. Post-certification in the state of Georgia, they reported on the record that bad police officers routinely get hired by other police departments inside of Georgia because they're not required to report to post why the police officer was fired in the first place. There is no reporting mandate for that reporting. This federal law would mandate a uniform policy in the reporting of these officers so that other jurisdictions that may want to hire them can at least know transparently what this officer may have done.
Okay, Dr. Ritchie, let me explain this. If a police department cares about what officers that they're hiring, they will inquire from the previous police department,
some of them
which has your file. If they don't care, then they won't inquire anyway. And if they don't care about the quality of officers that they hire, even if it's in a federal database, that police agency don't have to take the recommendation.
Let me tell you what else happens. We got like 1 minute. Let me tell you what else happens with a federal registry. It's available to me, it's available to you, it's available to everybody in the public. You know what that does? That creates public scrutiny and transparency from the taxpayer who's footing the bill for that cop, okay? It creates transparency, which also creates political and professional pressure to do the right thing. If you have a cop with an excessive background of violence, abuse, constitutional right complaints, etc., that is a good thing if you're looking to save the industry of policing moving forward.
Okay, let me just add this real quick.
30 seconds.
Well, this is the way I look at it as a former police officer. Listen, if a person is a bad actor and doing all of that stuff, they typically do not last on police departments in this country. You will go to jail if you routinely violate somebody's constitutional rights. I was in public office. I mean, I was in the public office in the police department. I was a spokesperson. I was in HR. I fired people. We hired people. You're not routinely violating somebody's constitutional rights and going to keep a job in this country.
That's the facts and stats do not bear out your statement. We have seen police officers who end up going viral, and then we look at their background, and they had significant history of violence and complaints against them and on their record. Brother,
complaints are very different than sustainable complaints.
No, well, damn it, I believe complaints should be investigated more so than by the police department who hired them. All right, listen, man, we got another opportunity coming up, brother. I always appreciate you on the show. Thank you, sir.
Our pleasure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, remember, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and take care of the planet. And remember, the truth is always indisputable.